I'm Cory Mills, a U.S. Army combat veteran who served in Iraq and Afghanistan. I came home and started a company making riot control munitions for law enforcement. You may know some of our work. And now the liberal media is crying about it.
Cory Mills, soldier, conservative, outsider.
I'm Cory Mills, and I approve this message because if the media wants to shed some real tears, I can help them out with that.
Cory Mills, violent candidate for Congress. Hey, I developed these things that only were used against certain kinds of protesters. You notice in those protests that he decided to advertise in that ad there, January 6th protesters, insurrectionists, rioters were not included. I wonder why. He wants you guys to know that. That's it. That's the message that he's sending to folks out there. Soldier, conservative, tough guy.
No, outsider.
Media. Outsider, that's right.
That was the other one. Outsider.
I'm an outsider. So then I'm shooting, I made sure I developed these tear gas canisters, which again, at the end, in case you missed it there, let's use that on the media so they can shed some real tears, because that's also very, very American. Let's get to details of who this a-hole is. So Mills is a former Trump defense advisor and combat veteran. He's running in this crowded Republican field to replace Democratic Representative Stephanie Murphy in Florida's 7th congressional
A Trump
district.
defense advisor, but he's an outsider, Jayar.
Way outside. And you know, Trump's an outsider too. That's why he was totally not connected in Washington, had no strings pulled, had no people behind him. There was no deep state behind Trump. No, he's working from the outside and everyone disliked him. Okay, recent polling shows that he's one of the favorites in the field, and the first time self-funded candidate has already racked up an impressive list of endorsements from pro-Trump lawmakers and conservative groups. Though he has yet to get the coveted official backing from Trump himself, the complete and total endorsement. He'll probably get it after he told everyone how violent he'd like to be. Okay,
absolutely.
Continue on about this guy. With the wealthy businessman drawing increased attention in the heavily watched open race, Politico ran a story last month noting that he grew rich from his company, PACM Solutions, selling arms and riot control gear to police departments and providing training to law enforcement and private security agencies. Pause. And providing training to law enforcement. As we've seen, the way law enforcement has always been doing things, I'm not sure which other kind of training they can have that this guy would provide that's any different. I think the only difference might be more tear gas canisters. He might have a weird economic interest in using more of those tear gas canisters and actually selling them to police departments, but he's put in charge of training them further, training them to use the things that he's gonna sell them. Just wanna point that out. More, noting that while there's no issue with the firm's activities, legally, the company's activities could prove dicey politically. Specifically, anti-riot bullets that were fired on Hong Kong protesters by police in 2019 came from their subsidiary. And throughout 2019 and 2020, millions of demonstrators took to the streets to oppose mainland China's extradition plan, protests that drew bipartisan applause from US lawmakers. And additionally, the company's tear gas was used against racial and social justice protesters in 20 following George Floyd's murder, as he pointed out there, resulting in probes by congressional Democrats about the health hazards of the firm's products. It's probably why he's upset as well too. In response to Politico's article, Mills said that his company was proud to sell tear gas to police departments and noted that the PACM, whatever the hell his name is, subsidiary is no longer supplies rubber bullets to Hong Kong. And lastly, Rick, Mills, who recently announced that he launched this 6-figure ad buy in the Orlando market, he takes aim at not just Politico in his last campaign commercial, but at the media at large. And he insinuates that, as we saw at the end. So report on this guy, point out how rabidly violent and hateful he is, and how he wants to continue to sell his products to police departments to continue to assault anyone that they would like, or they can call protesters, and that's his agenda.
Okay, so real quick, just while we're talking about this, can I see the campaign ad one more time?
Yeah, we're running.
Because as we're watching this, and it seems like at least the older crowd was having somewhat of a racial reckoning, and they saw the protests and they saw what happened and they took it in and they couldn't believe what was happening and blah, blah, blah. I think Jayar put it quite well with how he labeled these protests. Agitators, extremists, Antifa, like
BLM.
It's BLM. It's like all the dog whistles of not having, and I agree with you, not having any agenda. but just using these as political motivation to stir up more hate within their base, because that's pretty much all they have at this point. Now, on another plane, him selling, and he's funded his campaign, obviously, because he's a very, very wealthy person. Using tear gas, which in the middle of a pandemic, pretty rough. There's one study out right now that shows, again, it's early, shows the long-term effects of having tear gas inflicted on you. And some of the side effects were terrible. Blood clots, cramps that felt like sharp rocks, lung damage, chest pain, irregular menstrual cycles. This is serious stuff, and he's gloating about it.
Sure is.
This is not someone who should be anywhere near public service, let alone a detective, a deputy, a sergeant, or a politician, period. But it shows where we are at right now, that all you have to do is say, I want to cause harm to anybody that protests, and immediately you are launched into first or second place in your own respective race.
It says a lot about the party. It says a lot about what they've been fomenting and building up to the point where people like this can just say, you know what, I'm violent too, vote for me, and it'll actually work out for you.